I'm certain that you are watching very closely the news headlines these days indicating that perhaps some of these athletes who are now tied to violent acts may be the very subjects of what you are researching.
We're looking at acute concussions, and we're trying to track those over time. So understanding the effects of concussions on the brain is very important to understanding whether or not violence could be a consequence of traumatic brain injury. That's certainly something that is not yet well understood. We cannot make any conclusions about that at this time. However, we recognize what the acute symptoms of a concussion are, and we're trying to see how concussions evolve over time. And we're trying to capture biomarkers for concussions over time.
Welcome back. I'm Rick Unger, filling in for Steve Malzberg today, along with my co-host, John Fund. Steve will be back here in the chair on Monday. So there have been a lot of health scares in the news lately, everything from Ebola to new research coming out about the correlation between concussions and violence in the NFL, not unlike the clip that you just saw. Here to tell us more about these health issues is Newsmax Deputy Health Editor and Meet the Doctors contributor, Nick Tate. Nick, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
How are you, Nick?
You know, what we're doing with our new Meet the Doctors program is we're talking to Dr. Tina Shetty, who is a neurologist and a consultant, an independent consultant to the NFL and New York Mets, and she's telling us about the new research that's going on, trying to determine whether there are indeed links between these traumatic brain injuries that NFL players and professional sports players have and domestic violence. There's a pretty long history in terms of research connecting brain injury and dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's disease, but there's a new emerging body of evidence to suggest that these repeated blows to the head can in fact predispose certain players to domestic violence, and that's what we're exploring on the program tomorrow.
Well, you know, Nick, I saw some research out in the past couple of days. I think they did some testing on something like 85 NFL players who are sadly deceased, and they found that all but 3 of them had suffered some sort of brain, not only injury, but disease. I mean, that's got to tell you something.
That's right. You know, one of the big things that they're seeing is damage to the prefrontal cortex of the brain of these players. It's the front of the brain, and it's connected with impulse, it's connected with aggressive behavior, and they believe that there may be a correlation between that brain damage and violence. Now, we need to be clear. There are a great number of other issues to be considered. The NFL certainly does create a kind of culture of violence. These players are trained to be aggressive. There is also a kind of star maker machinery and the kind of ego boosting that goes on behind the scenes. And in those cases, some of the violence that's on the field may spill over into personal lives, into domestic relationships, and that's where the concern is. If you look at crime stats, the other reality is that NFL players have about 3 to 4 times the rate of domestic violence arrests as the general population. So the new research that we're hearing about from Dr. Tina Shetty and others is really looking at whether there's a connection between those two things and anything can be done about it.
Well, you know, I'm going to be curious to see if the doctor's research takes a look into the family backgrounds of these players to see if domestic violence was part of their history growing up, what their behavior was before they got to the NFL. You know, certainly college football does present some of the same dangers, probably not the same as the kind of hits they're taking in the National Football League. So I'm going to be curious to see how that correlates. One quick question I want to ask you before I have to let you go. You would think in this day and age that technology would allow for the creation of a helmet that would better protect the brain. What's up with that?
Well, that's really part of what's driving the research. It's not to explain or make excuses for the players and say it's okay, domestic violence is okay because of brain injury. That's not what it's about. It's about trying to identify whether or not equipment changes can become, make changes in helmets and other pieces of equipment that protect particularly young kids. A lot of these NFL players, for instance, started playing when they were very young as children.
So Nick, I got to let you go because I'm getting the high sign. Getting the high side, Nick. That means I got to let you go. We'll all be watching the show tomorrow. We look forward to it. You can catch Meet the Doctors tomorrow at 7 and 11 a.m. on DirecTV, channel 349, Dish Network channel 223, or NewsmaxTV.com.